many answers why God needs to create. Let's now go very quickly through the rest of this now as we began our understanding of Raphael's story here. There's so much of this that I would love to be able to read. Right at the end, at line 170, though I, uncircumscribed myself, retire, and put not forth my goodness, which is free to act or not, necessity and chance approach not me, and what I will is fate. In other words, God says, I determine the outcome in all things. Where of course, we've said this before. Then we began to have the songs of heaven. It's interesting, at line 192, for example, so sang the hierarchies, and there's all of this music kind of references. Meanwhile, the sun on his great expedition now appeared, girt with omnipotence, with radiance crowned of majesty divine. The sun is leaving heaven, getting ready to go and begin the creation process. Sapience and love immense, and all his Father in him shone. Line 196. Now, we've said already in earlier lectures that Milton and his father had all kinds of interesting relationships. I think Milton is suggesting that you can tell a lot about a father by a good son. I think Milton himself would want to say that his father should be proud of him as a son for doing what he did. Let's just point out that in Paradise Lost 3, line 139, and in Republic 6, lines 719 to 721, lines that we've already talked about, this same notion appears again there as well. Let's point out as well this idea of heavenly singing and heavenly music. Remember that in our earlier lectures on Plato, we said that Pythagoras himself made this argument, and of course very much influenced Plato's idea on the notion of harmonies and heavenly music, right? At line 205 to 217, now we are ready for the Son and the Spirit. Heaven opened wide, her ever-during gates, harmonious sound on golden hinges moving to let forth the King of Glory and his powerful Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1 and following in the New Testament Gospel of John. The King of Glory and his powerful Word and Spirit coming to create new worlds. On heavenly ground they stood, and from the shore they viewed the vast immeasurable abyss, outrageous as a sea, dark, wasteful, wild, up from the bottom, turned by furious winds and surging waves as mountains to assault heaven's height, and with the center mixed the pole. I'd just like to pause and point this out at 3a. Do you remember those final lines of Keats's, when I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain? Remember, and when I fear for a creature of an hour that I shall never look upon thee more, and never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. Remember what he says? Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame do nothingness to see. Milton had to have been in Keats's mind, of course. Keats loves Milton and loves these lines. In other words, the sun is standing on this vast shore as he's getting ready to begin to create. And how does he do it? Starting at line 217, silence, ye troubled waves, and thou deep, peace, said then the omnific Word. Your discord end. So at the very beginning of the entire creation process, the Son will speak Word, and of course silence. And we think, of course, of the story of Jesus in the Gospels calming the waters of the Galilee, the storm waters. It's a beautiful rendering. All right, let's go through the creation narrative now quickly, starting at line 243 and so on. Let there be light. We'll go through this, of course, day 1. Let there be light, 243. Said God. Notice this is God the Son, right? And forthwith light is going to appear at 243, and we have at line 256 thus was the first day even and morn, nor passed uncelebrated nor unsung by the celestial choirs, when orient light exhaling first from darkness they beheld, birthday of heaven and earth, with joy and shout the hollow universal orb they filled, and torched their golden harps, and hymning praised God and his works. Creator hymn they sung, both when first evening was and when first morn. So let's just put it in our notes. All the way through this rendition of the Genesis 1-2 account, Milton is wanting to emphasize joy, music, the harmonies of the universe. Day 2 will begin at line 261. And again, I wish I could just read all of this to you, but I don't have enough time, and I'm trying to show restraint here. 261, the firmament, that is to say the sky, the atmosphere, the entire mass of air and vapor will all be created. Day 3 will begin at line 275, with the waters and the seas and the land being divided. And then notice at line 302, we have an interesting foreshadowing of the fall at Paradise Lost 9, book 9, line 86. He's talking about the rivers, and he says these rivers are all over the place. And he says, but they, the rivers, are underground or circuit-wide, with serpent error wandering, found their way, and on the washy ooze deep channels wore. Again, back to this notion of mazy and oozy and all of those kinds of things. It's a beautiful rendering of the rivers like a snake. Of course, we know by both Genesis 3 and Paradise Lost Book 9 what snakes will mean for us. So again, some good foreshadowing. And then take a look at line 315. I mean, I'm picking stuff here at random. I'm just picking some of the stuff that I love. You read it and you find your own connections. Remember, we define learning in 303 as the ability to connect new information to old information. But watch this one, for example. On this third day, the flowers and the grass plants are going to be created. And for example, we're told, he scarce had said, when the bare earth till then desert, and bare, unsightly, unadorned, brought forth the tender grass, whose verdure clad her universal face with pleasant green. Of course, we can't help but think of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, Passage 6, and Tenderly Will I Use You, or Tender Grass. Of course, Whitman had to love his Milton, and the joy of this passage is, of course, some of the most beautiful poetry we'll ever read. At line 329, Earth, we're told at line 329, Earth now seemed like to heaven, a seat where gods might dwell or wonder with delight, and love to haunt her sacred shades, though God had not yet reigned upon the earth. By the way, do note as a cross-reference here that Paradise Lost Book 5, lines 574 to 576, will play a little bit different kind of game with this idea that how much earth is really like heaven. At line 339, we have day 4 and the sun and the moon. Of course, at line 370, we have a great line. First, this is awesome. I mean, think about this one in the personification, right, of the sun. First, in his east, the glorious lamp was seen, region of day, and all the horizon round invested with bright rays, jocund to run his longitude through heaven's high road. The gray dawn and the Pleiades before him danced, shedding sweet influence. The sun is getting up, ready to go for his race, and this is way even more beautiful than any of those Greek cosmogonic stories about Apollo pulling the sun with horses until they get tired. Here, the sun is ready to go for his morning workout. Beautiful. Day 5 begins on 387, and of course this is the water. Let the waters generate reptile with spawn abundant living soul. Many readers have pointed out that the way this is described, let the waters generate reptile with spawn abundant, that there is potentially a Darwinian reading of this, and of course again we'll let you get into those debates on your own. The lines 410 to 412. I mean, I love this stuff, right? And bended dolphins play in the ocean, right? The joy is here, obvious. Part huge of bulk, wallowing unwieldy, enormous in their gait, tempest the ocean, the whales. There, Leviathan, hugest of living creatures on the deep, stretched like a promontory, sleeps or swims, and swims a moving land, and at his gills draws in, and at his trunk spouts out a sea. We are reminded, of course, that book 1 simile of Satan. The sailor looks out and thinks he sees land, only it's Leviathan, the huge whale. monster figure. At line 414, we have, by the way, this Leviathan thing, for those of you who are interested, for a cross-reference, Job, the book of Job in the Old Testament, chapter 41, Leviathan is mentioned there if you want to run that one down. 414, the mention of the birds that will be created, and the eagle, and the swans to follow. All of this is just amazing, amazing poetry. Day 6, 449. The sixth, and of creation last arose with evening harps and matin. When God said, let the earth bring forth soul, living in her kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth, each in their kind. The earth obeyed, and straight, opening her fertile womb, teemed at a birth in numerous living creatures, perfect forms, limbered and full grown. Out of the ground uprose as from his lair the wild beast where he wanders in forest, wild and thick brake or den. Now this is interesting stuff. Notice that here we'll have the idea of soul. This takes us, of course, back to Plato's Phaedo, the idea that you have a body, but then you have this other thing, spirit, soul, that Socrates will argue right before he dies. And again, go back to that lecture to hear those arguments. And then you get to decide at 3b whether you believe in this idea of there being something special beyond your body that makes you who you are. Your consciousness, your soul, your energy, your spirit, whatever, your heart, whatever language you want to use to try to explain it. Notice here, this is interesting, that out of the ground come these creatures, which seems to suggest that the ground created these creatures. So we've got the generation of creatures out of the water and now out of the ground. Very interesting. Of course, again, a Darwinian reading of this could be fascinating, right? 495, God creates the serpent, the subtlest beast of all the field. Of course, this is a direct quote from the King James Genesis 3 account that we read in an earlier lecture, right? Of huge extent, sometimes with brazen eyes and hairy mane, terrific. Line 449 begins day 6, all land animals, and then finishes at 499. Now, heaven in all her glory shone in wilder motions as the great first mover's hand. We immediately think of Aristotle, the first mover, the first cause. First wheeled their course. Earth in her rich attire, commensurate, lovely, smile, a smiling earth. Again, tremendous joy here. And you notice that even in the reading of the Genesis 1 account, how many times it says good and very good, right? Air, water, earth, by fowl, fish, beast was flown, was swum, was walked, frequent, and of the sixth day yet remained. There wanted yet the masterwork, the end of all yet done. The end, the penultimate purpose. In other words, the Genesis 1-2 account suggests, as Milton will play the game here, that human beings are the penultimate end of all of nature. Of course, many readers will argue that humans are just a part of nature and not somehow its penultimate end. I'll let you debate, right? I'll let you debate. A creature who, not prone and brute as other creatures, but endued with sanctity of reason, might erect his stature and upright, with front serene, govern the rest. In other words, humans stand aright. This reminds us, of course, of that riddle of the Sphinx, right? What animal walks on 4 legs at morning, on 2 legs at noon? That would be the upright of the human. And then, of course, 3 legs, that's when we get old, right? Notice what else he says about humans. Self-knowing, and from thence magnanimous to correspond with heaven. In other words, our capacity to be self-knowing is what makes us very special. We love to ask this question, of course, about computer games. We've asked it in other lectures. When, for example, computer games are like Deep Blue, we think of playing Kasparov, of course, beat Kasparov. When a computer game is playing chess, is it playing chess or doing chess? The idea, of course, of play has something to do with self-knowing, right? We have that capacity to be aware of our own thoughts. Who or what is that that's aware? Consciousness? Where is that? But grateful to acknowledge whence his good descends, thither with heart and voice and eyes directed in devotion to adore and worship God supreme, who made him chief of all his works. In other words, Milton will have Raphael remind Adam, because you were created last, because you are special, that is the reason why you glorify and obey God. Don't eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, therefore, right? Therefore, the omnipotent eternal Father for where is he not present? Thus to his Son audibly spake. Now God's going to speak to the Son after all of the other creation of the Son. Let us make now man in our image. We're quoting, of course, right from the King James Genesis 1. Man in our similitude, and let them rule over the fish and the fowl of the sea and the air, beast of the field and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps the ground. This said, he formed thee, Adam, thee, O man, dust of the ground, and in thy nostrils breathed the breath of life. In his own image he created thee, in the image of God express, and thou became a living soul. Male he created thee, but thy consort female for race. Then blessed mankind and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, subdue it, and throughout dominion hold over fish of the sea, and fowl of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth. We read these lines earlier. Wherever thus created, for no place is yet distinct by name, thence as thou knowest, he brought thee into this delicious grove, this garden, planted with the trees of God, delectable both to behold and taste, and freely all their pleasant fruit for food gave thee. All sorts are here, that all the earth yields variety without end. But of the tree, which tasted works knowledge of good and evil, thou mayest not. In the day thou eatest, thou diest. Death is the penalty imposed. Beware, and govern well thy appetite, lest sin surprise thee, and her black attendant, death. Ending at line 546. Well, this is compelling stuff, of course, and you have this challenge, right? That is to say, make sure you do not touch that tree. Everything else, all created for you, and you are the penultimate end of all creation. Well, of course, now we'll at line 548, we're finished. Here, finished he. And all that he had made, viewed, and behold, all was entirely good. So even and morn accomplished the sixth day, yet not till the Creator from his work desisting, though unwearied, up returned, up to the heaven of heavens, his high abode, thence to behold his new created world, the addition of his empire, how it showed in prospect from his throne, how good, how fair, answering his great idea. Now, of course, this notion of the great idea, much has been made of this line, that this was the ultimate purpose, right? The great idea. Now, just quickly to finish, line 564. I've got to read this because it so resonates with our reading of Whitman as we have been studying from Leaves of Grass. The heavens and all the constellations rung, the planets in their stations listening stood, while the bright pomp ascended jubilant. And of course, if you read at all the Leaves of Grass, you will know that, of course, in that last deathbed edition, the 1892 edition, there is this poem called An Ended Day. The soothing, I'm reading now Whitman, the soothing sanity and blitheness of completion, the pomp and hurried contest glare and rush are done. Now, triumph, transformation, jubilant. I can't help but share a small story. A number of years ago, a dear friend and I, and two dear friends and I, climbed Mount Fuji in Japan. And the question all the way up there was, what will we read when we finally summit? In the early morning, you climb in the darkness so that you can see that horizon, the land of the rising sun. And the question was, what are we going to read? And I somehow knew it had to be Whitman. And of course, I read this one. But I was thinking these lines from Milton. There continues to be more of this jubilant song. Open ye everlasting gates, they sung. Open ye heavens, your living doors. Let in the great Creator from his work returned, magnificent, his 6 days' work, a world. These words come from Psalm 24:7. Sung by Levite priests, we're told, as the ark was being carried into the sanctuary on Mount Zion. There's a wonderful convergence then of this powerful poetry. At line 592, now we're resting, blessed and hallowed the seventh day, as resting on that day from all his work, but not in silence. Let's point out that this not in silence, we're going back to line 2:17, when the sun says silence to the waves and to chaos. Here we finish with beautiful music, right? Line 602, the song, great are thy works, Jehovah, infinite thy power. What thought can measure thee, or tongue relate thee? Greater now in thy return than from the giant angels. And again, the song goes on. Finally, beginning at line 613, just to finish. Who seeks to lessen thee against his purpose, serves to manifest the more thy might. His evil thou usest. This will be, of course, Milton's Theodicy, right? As we've said in earlier lectures, out of evil comes good. And from thence created some, more good. Witness this new-made world, another heaven, from heaven gate not far, founded in view of the clear haven, the glassy sea, of amplitude almost immense, with stars numerous, and every star perhaps a world of destined habitation. But thou knowest their seasons. Among these the seed of men, earth, with her neither ocean circumfused, their pleasant dwelling place. Thrice happy men and sons of men, whom God hath thus advanced, created in his image, there to dwell and worship him, and in reward to rule over his works on earth, in sea, or air, and multiply a race of worshippers, holy and just. Notice the word just here, to justify the ways of God to men. Thrice happy if they know their happiness and persevere upright. Of course, this notion of knowledge, but persevering in knowledge, is central. We even think, for example, of that line in the Bhagavad Gita, book 16, about that notion of persevering. You've got to get all the way through. We think, of course, of Dante's up on your feet passage that we've quoted before, right? Where Virgil says to Dante, I know you're tired, but up on your feet, this is no time to tire. You have to persevere. Well, there's the reading of Book 7, and it is amazing poetry. You have to enjoy that poetry. I hope that I've been able to share some of that with you. Let's now quickly do Level 2, Level 3. At 2A, Messages, Themes. Note the intentionality, the purpose of God to create. Note the joy of creation. You are special, and Milton would argue ontologically